The official report sits in a dusty archive, its ink faded but its numbers stark. It claims 986 kills from 9,860 rounds. A perfect, clean 10 rounds per kill. This is the story they wanted you to believe. But hidden records and witness accounts, long ignored, paint a very different picture. They speak not of clean kills, but of a deafening, useless chatter of machine guns against a tide of flesh and feathers. They describe an enemy that could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. This wasn't a cull, it was a war. A war that a modern, human army, armed with the best technology of its day, comprehensively lost. And the story of how they lost, and how they lied about it, is far more disturbing than you can imagine. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. To understand how a nation could declare war on birds and lose, you have to go back to the source. To the red dust of Western Australia in 1932, this wasn't just any time. It was the absolute depths of the Great Depression. The world's economy had crumbled, and for the farmers settled on these marginal lands, many of them veterans of the Great War, life was a desperate daily battle for survival. They had been promised fertile ground, a new start, but they found only hardship. And then, the real invasion began. It didn't come with banners or bugles. It came on two legs. A tide of feathers and beaks pouring out of the interior. An army, 20,000 strong. This was the Great Emu Migration. These were not just birds, they were biological siege engines. Towering up to 1.9 meters tall and weighing as much as 55 kilograms, they moved with a relentless, drumming purpose. The very fences the government had helped build to keep out rabbits were trampled into the dust. The wire mesh snapping under their weight. Wheat crops, the farmers' only hope of staving off financial ruin, were flattened and consumed on a massive scale. To the veterans watching from their homesteads, it must have felt like a cruel joke. Another form of trench warfare, they were besieged by a force they couldn't comprehend. An enemy that didn't fear them. Faced with this overwhelming force, these men, who had once faced German machine guns, did the only thing they could think of. They asked for guns of their own. The farmers' pleas did not go unanswered. In fact, they were answered with a level of seriousness that bordered on the absurd. The Minister of Defense himself, Sir George Pierce, approved a full-scale military intervention. They weren't just sending a few soldiers with rifles. They were deploying the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. Command was given to Major G.P.W. Meredith, a man tasked with bringing the full might of modern warfare to bear on this feathered menace. His arsenal was not for scaring birds. It was for annihilating an enemy. He was equipped with 2 Lewis automatic machine guns and a staggering 10,000 rounds of 303 ammunition site research data. You have to understand what a Lewis gun was. This was the chattering, mechanical heart of the trenches in the Great War, a weapon capable of firing over 500 rounds a minute, designed to scythe through lines of running men in no man's land. It was an instrument of industrial slaughter. And now, 2 of them were being mounted in the back of trucks, their sights set on the wheat fields of Campion. The full, deadly weight of the Australian military was about to be unleashed. It must have seemed, on paper, like the simplest, most brutally one-sided operation in military history. They had calculated the firepower. They had the element of surprise. What they had failed to calculate, what no one could have possibly prepared for, was the nature of their enemy. The first trigger pull should have been a slaughter. Instead, it was a lesson in futility. The soldiers had laid a perfect ambush, luring a huge flock of over 1,000 emus towards a local dam, research data. The Lewis gun was in position. The trap was set. As the birds came into range, the gunner opened fire. The deafening chatter of automatic fire echoed across the plains for a few seconds, and then, a sudden, shocking silence. The gun had jammed. Before the second weapon could be brought to bear, the entire flock, a vast, panicked cloud of dust and feathers, had scattered in all directions. When the smoke cleared and the count was taken, The result was a pathetic joke. Fewer than 12 birds had been killed. Research data. And this is where the story turns from military operation to absolute farce. Because that mechanical failure wasn't even the most damning revelation of the day. It was what happened in the very first engagement that should have warned them. On that occasion, the gun worked perfectly. They fired burst after burst into a smaller group, expending nearly 1,000 rounds of ammunition. The official reports, when you dig into them, reveal a statistic so absurd it seems impossible. They killed maybe a dozen birds. Think about that. The Army's own data confirms a verifiable ratio of approximately 83 rounds for every single confirmed kill, cite research data. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a jam. This was something else entirely. It raised a terrifying question for Major Meredith and his men. What happens when your bullets hit, but the enemy simply doesn't fall? The answer to that impossible question didn't come from a ballistics expert or a scientist, but from the commanding officer himself, written in the stark, astonished language of his official field report. Major Meredith, a career soldier, tried to explain the inexplicable failure to his superiors, and in doing so, he gave the emus their legendary status. He wrote, and this is a direct quote from his report, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." This wasn't an excuse. It was a soldier's stunned admission that he was facing something beyond the scope of his training and technology. The forensic reality is even more incredible. Later analysis by ornithologists revealed the emu's secret weapon, its own body. A thick, dense mat of wiry feathers covers a layer of subcutaneous fat, creating a natural form of shock-absorbing armor. The high-velocity, 303 rounds, designed to tumble and create devastating wounds in human flesh, were simply punching through the feathers and non-vital tissue, or deflecting off bone. Picture this. A machine gun, a weapon that cut down a generation of men in Europe, is rendered useless by feathers and bone. But it wasn't just their biology, it was their tactics. The emus were masters of guerrilla warfare. After the first shots, the single large mob would instantly break into countless small groups, sprinting away erratically at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. They never stood still. They never presented a clear target. The heavy, cumbersome Lewis guns were completely unable to track them. Meredith was facing an enemy that was not only bulletproof, but tactically brilliant. He had brought the tools of static trench warfare to fight a chaotic, lightning-fast insurgency. The mission was a complete, unmitigated failure. And now, the entire world was beginning to take notice. The battlefield humiliation was so total, so undeniable, that there was only one option left. On November 8th, just a week after the campaign began, Major Meredith and his men packed up their Lewis guns and retreated. They had expended 2,500 rounds of ammunition and had inflicted almost no significant damage on the enemy. The war was, for the moment, over, and the emus had won. The news of the Australian Army's defeat at the hands of large, flightless birds became an international sensation, a source of profound mockery. Newspapers had a field day. A conservationist writing in a local paper wryly noted that the emus had deployed guerrilla tactics and that the military's pompous campaign had been an utter failure. The story painted a picture of a hapless, Keystone Cop-style operation, a farce that embarrassed the nation on a global scale. And this is what powerful institutions do when faced with public humiliation. They don't admit fault. They control the narrative. If you dig into the official reports from that first week, you find a mess of contradictions and statistical noise. The kill counts are wildly inconsistent, changing from one document to the next. It's the beginning of a deliberate pattern of obfuscation, an attempt to muddy the waters and hide the true scale of the failure. The army had been beaten and, worse, they had become a joke. The story should have ended there. A bizarre footnote in military history. But for an institution built on pride and an image of invincibility, public ridicule is a declaration of war in itself. They weren't just going to let the emus win. Stung by the public humiliation and under immense political pressure to show results, Major Meredith was sent back into the field. This was no longer just a culling operation. It was a mission to restore the pride of the Australian military. The second offensive was more ruthless, more sustained, and according to the official story, far more successful. The final report, the one that sits in the archives today, presents a neat, tidy conclusion to the war. It states, with bureaucratic certainty, that the operation concluded with a final tally of 986 confirmed kills, achieved with an expenditure of 9,860 rounds of ammunition. Cite research data. And there it is. The lie, cast in lead. Look at those numbers again. 9,860 rounds, 986 kills. An exact, perfect, mathematically pleasing ratio of 10 rounds for every 1 kill. Does that sound like the chaotic reality of a battlefield? Does that sound like firing a machine gun from a moving truck at erratic sprinting targets? No. That sounds like a number invented by a clerk in an office. A convenient fiction designed to turn a story of catastrophic failure into one of acceptable, if inefficient, military action. It's too clean. It's too perfect. Historians now view this figure with extreme skepticism, believing it to be a complete administrative fabrication. Cite research data. It's a number designed to be reported in newspapers, not one that reflects the bloody, frustrating reality on the ground. This isn't a statistic, it's the core of the cover-up. But if that official number is a lie, then it begs a far more disturbing question. What real, undocumented horror was it designed to hide? That clean, fabricated number was designed to hide a truth that was anything but. It was meant to cover up the gruesome, inefficient reality of the campaign. The military's own report contained a haunting, unverifiable footnote. A claim that an additional 2,500 emus were not killed outright, but were wounded and left to die slowly from their injuries over the following days. This wasn't a clean cull. It was an exercise in mass suffering. The true horror isn't found in the official records, but in the forgotten accounts of those who witnessed it. A diary, kept by a farmer's wife and discovered by historians decades later, gives a voice to the brutality. She wrote of the sickening whiz of stray 303 rounds flying past their homestead, a terrifying reminder of the indiscriminate fire. But her most disturbing entry described the aftermath of the shooting. The sight of crippled birds dragging their legs for days across the plains. This is the image the official numbers were designed to erase. Not a decisive victory, but a landscape filled with maimed animals left to a slow, agonizing death. Other accounts describe the sensory reality of the engagements. The acrid smell of gunpowder and cordite mixing with the choking red dust, followed by an unnatural silence when the guns stopped. A silence not of success, but of failure. Soon broken by the distant, mocking, drumming call of the emus that had escaped unharmed. The story of the Great Emu War had now completed its transformation from a bizarre military blunder to a tragic, gruesome, and protracted campaign of suffering. A campaign that began as a farce had devolved into a slow, grinding horror, and even the most stubborn military pride couldn't sustain it. In December of 1932, the guns finally fell silent for good. The Australian military officially and permanently withdrew its forces from the field of battle. Research data. The Great Emu War was over, but the emu problem remained. And the true solution, when it finally came, was the ultimate indictment of the entire military operation. There were no more machine guns, no more soldiers, no more grand strategies. The government simply instituted a bounty system. A small payment for every emu killed, paid directly to the farmers. And over the next 6 months, the farmers themselves, armed with their own rifles and an intimate knowledge of the land, succeeded where the army had so catastrophically failed, culling tens of thousands of birds. It turned out that a man protecting his own livelihood was infinitely more effective than a soldier following confused orders. The verdict was undeniable. Written across the empty wheat fields of Western Australia, the state, with all its institutional might, its heavy artillery, and its fabricated reports, had been comprehensively beaten. The emus, by every tactical and strategic measure, had won the war. They had proven that an army's pride and its most powerful weapons were no match for the chaotic, unpredictable force of nature. But the story doesn't end with a winner and a loser. It ends with a question that echoes through history. A question about the true nature of power itself. So, what is the lesson of this feathered fable? It's a story that has been told and retold, often for laughs. A quirky anecdote about the time Australia lost a war to birds. But the true meaning is darker, more profound. It's a story about the staggering arrogance of human power, a stark reminder of our tendency to underestimate the raw, chaotic force of the natural world. It reveals the ultimate limits of brute force. That a machine gun, an icon of human dominance, is a useless tool when faced with a problem it was never designed to solve. But more than that, it's a timeless lesson in how institutions behave when they fail. Faced with an embarrassing and absurd defeat, the military didn't learn a lesson. It wrote a lie. It manufactured a clean, statistical victory to paste over a messy, humiliating truth. This instinct to control the narrative, to fabricate success, to choose the illusion of competence over the reality of failure, is not unique to this story. It's a flaw embedded in the very nature of power. And so we are left with the final, haunting image. A professional army, armed with the weapons of a world war, retreating in disgrace from a creature seen as a simple pest. A creature with no strategy, no leader, and no weapon other than its own resilient nature. It leaves us with one last uncomfortable question. In this conflict between organized, industrial power and simple, stubborn life, who was really the more advanced?